Wonderful. Hey, everybody. So I'm Aeva Black, open source PM at the Confidential Compute team. Some of the folks here know me because I've been around Kubernetes and other projects before. And that'll kind of come into my talk, but it's not really a talk about Kubernetes per se. It's a talk about open source communities and how those have informed some of the ways we all work. I wanted to start a little bit the story from when I got into tech quite a while ago. A little dev-heavy startup down in Santa Monica, so we all kind of struggled with commutes back then, in the times before COVID. Folks had long and unpredictable hours, and it was a lot of really small teams, very few meetings. And I would often not go in the office. Other folks would often just kind of not go in the office, and we all kind of worked remotely. And this being my first job out of college, I didn't really think too much of what made it work. As my career went on, I realized that was pretty unique experience. I've been thinking a lot, like, why did that work so well, and how do I duplicate that? So these are sort of the three takeaways from it. As a team, as a small company, right, we all bonded through these shared distributed experiences. A lot of us were gamers. It was a game company. We'd play RPGs online, occasionally get together for dinner. And we relied pretty heavily on asynchronous communications, which, chat systems back then were really the normal for online games. We didn't have all the voice or video tools that we do now. And as developers, we really relied on wikis and file shares. And we scheduled office time, either phone calls or actually like driving in and dealing with the traffic in Santa Monica to get into the office when we needed a high bandwidth communication. Specifically for things if there was a conflict or we thought that discussion might generate conflict, where we'd need to rely on nonverbal cues in order to mend a relationship or prevent conflict from getting bigger. And again, at the time, I didn't really think about it. It seemed natural. That's just what we all did as gamers. But looking at other communities that I've worked in since then, this is something we've thought more intentionally about. So, fast forward 20 years, I've worked in several different open source projects and a couple companies that were fully distributed. Percona had really no office. And then Ormuco, I actually helped pivot the company from one office to 4 offices, and most folks working from home by the time that was all kind of wrapped up. Now, in a lot of these open source projects, we've had discussions. How do we sustain this? How do we build and grow the community? And I didn't want to just talk about my experience and how I've done this, so I reached out to those communities. And on Twitter, because why not? That's where a lot of folks I've met over the years, we all stay in touch there. In total, I had 17 different people respond to me, sort of ranging from they've been in tech for less than 5 years to some folks who've been working in fully distributed teams for 40 years. Some folks who founded companies that are entirely remote. Shared their experience with me. Unfortunately, I do want to call out some gaps in this. And the rest of this talk is going to be sort of the intersection of my experiences and what they all shared with me. But none of the respondents, nor my own experience, really addresses how to work with folks across very different culture and time zone combination. So Southeast Asia, India, China, Japan, we've all had struggles bridging that culture and time gap. Hopefully someone someone today will think of a solution there. But lots of different people came back, not just with their anecdotes, but references. I have a link at the end of this talk to talks they've all given as well, or papers they've written on these topics. A bunch of these folks and I worked together around the Debian and Ubuntu, which became sort of the basis for how OpenStack summits were planned. And from all of this, reviewing it all, 3 principles emerged, right? If you shift from an office culture to a remote culture, individual work often becomes more challenging. Or if you're in an office culture and you're also trying to contribute to an open source project, that is a different sort of challenge. Again, if you're shifting from an office culture to not an office culture, team communication can falter over time. And every circumstance, every person is unique. So if you're a manager, approaching this with flexibility is really key. I'm going to talk a little bit first about some individual adaptation techniques, and then later I'll spend most of this talk talking about sort of group adaptation or organizational adaptation if you're leading a team or a company or a project. And hopefully some of those tools will help all of us as this new pandemic normal find I've been finding my own stride lately, but it's different. So first, some tips about work-life balance. One of the biggest things for me has been having an office with a door, even at home, like as a signal to other people in the house or to myself that, hey, I'm at work now. The door is closed. Not taking my laptop to bed is, it's hard. Because it's easy to just like, I was dreaming about this code, I'm gonna go write it. No, but yeah, that doesn't really lead long-term to a healthy work-life balance. When we, all used to go into offices, for me at least, the commute to the office or getting coffee at the end of the day, like these rituals help to shift into a work mindset or out of a work mindset. And in working from home, I've had to consciously reestablish those rituals, and it's really helpful. A lot of other folks have found that as well. Variations in individual sort of ebb and flow of a day. Like I will take time in the afternoon to take a meeting while I walk around the neighborhood, rather than sit at my desk where I'm just kind of, oh gosh, I've been here for 8 hours. And I'll break up my afternoon more than my morning. And that was actually something a lot of folks that were responding to me said to help, because there's no commute at the end of the day. So how do you like get out of work mode more easily at the end of the day? You break up your afternoon a little bit more, take a few more breaks so that you're less in it when 5 or 7 o'clock, whatever your end of day is, rolls around. And then, offices are really set up to be kind of homogenous to a large degree. And our homes are not. Our homes are pretty unique. So there are different environmental factors. Hopefully everybody has, ergonomic stuff and noise canceling headphones. But I was thinking, what if we could use VR? I don't know how that would work for maintaining culture long distance, but it seems to work for gamers. Could we do that in a work setting? But environment doesn't solve everything. In this work from home reality, children and pets are a different challenge for folks than one that I know. Well, what if you live in a noisy part of town? Like I have airplanes flying overhead all the time here. It's not so great for a lot of meetings. I've bought a great noise canceling mic. And then again, if you're a manager, many people have different situational needs, and make sure to be flexible for that. And as far as kids go, there's really nothing I can add to this, but several folks responded with suggestions that having a co-parent, especially if you have young kids, super essential. Being able to build a flexible schedule, really critical. Again, if you're a manager, give folks that opportunity. I'm gonna jump into some organizational adaptation techniques. This is really what I wanna talk most about. It's easier if you're starting from scratch, but most of us aren't. Back in about the mid-90s, anthropologist Robin Dunbar was studying primates and observed that the amount of time available for social grooming seems to determine the group size. More time invested in maintaining a social connection with someone built the sort of smaller circles. And they observed both in primates and then also really ultimately, if this applies to humans, we can maintain group sizes of about 150 to 300 people where we know what folks are working on. This is our extended organization size. Team size, maybe 15, 20, 30, where you're all working towards the same thing together every day. And then 5 is really the limit for your close friends or a SEAL team. And it is not arbitrary. This is a sort of artifact of our brains and how much time we have available to maintain those connections, at least according to Dunbar's theories. And this is relevant to open source communities or to all of us now, because we naturally distrust those further out from the center of these social rings. And when we're interpreting ambiguous signals, a text message, a Slack message that might be sarcastic, it might be a joke, it might be mean, we're not really sure. We give the benefit of the doubt less to people further away from the center. And that's sort of the basis of a trusting culture. So how do we maintain, in these now distributed communities where we're no longer just running into each other in the hall and grabbing lunch or coffee together, it takes more intentionality to maintain the social grooming habits that keep people in these inner circles in our work settings. Now in OpenStack, we'd spent a lot of time consciously thinking about this. And before that, folks in the Debian community and Ubuntu community had done the same thing. And I had a couple conversations with folks in Kubernetes, so I assume it's also been going on there for a while. Like, how often do we have to meet? And how do we facilitate community staying cohesive and not sort of defaulting to distrusting each other at large scales when you've got so many contributors from all over the world? And same thing now with a lot of our companies, we're all working from home, the same techniques apply. Now in the gaming communities, this is really the only place that I've seen this solved without gravitating back to an in-person setting. You know, open source development groups meet about every 6 months. This is pretty consistent whether it's Linux kernel or Kubernetes, 3 to 6 months. And that has sort of emerged from a lot of these communities studying how much face time does it take to maintain social cohesion in these groups. So what happens as we scale out from a small team to a large team, whether it's open source or a company or whatever, right? If you're trying to get all the developers to talk together, just all the people, you end up with the sort of flat organization and a really high communication tax. And there's different approaches to building hierarchies, whether it's team structure, PMs, or project leads, or you know, technical oversight committee. All of those are different approaches to try and solve this flat org scaling problem. Specifically, if you're moving from a team in an office, or you're adding people that may work in different time zones, one big thing to keep in mind is that unintended cliques affect everybody. If only a small percentage of the folks are in the office, or if some folks have a different communication bandwidth, maybe 2/3 of your team are using voice and the other third are only using text, that the folks outside of that unintended clique end up suffering, and that in turn affects everybody. It affects the team morale, it affects the team efficiency, and it starts to take up more manager time to address that. So if you're building teams or you're building open source projects and organizing them, one thing to think about is how do you enable communication not to result in a clique? One approach is to balance the bandwidth. You know, it's a bit awkward to say, like, mandate the use of the least common denominator communication system. Maybe that is text, Slack and IRC or Matrix or whatever. Maybe everyone gets on voice, but like on a headset, instead of 6 people at a table and 2 people on a phone, the 2 people on the phone end up being kind of, it's hard for them to hear everything. And you can organize teams to balance communication. So actually don't take most of the team from the same time zone. Either the whole team is in one time zone or the whole team is spread over different time zones. But if you had like a couple folks in Europe and then most folks in the US West Coast, there's so little overlap, you really ought to just have 2 teams. And one way to know if you're doing this right or wrong, if you're doing it wrong, then your work kind of looks like this, right? The actual work is like way down there at the bottom, and all the rest of the time is just kind of talking about work. So another way to address this in particular is document everything. Make sure it's indexable. share documentation before meetings. And this applies perfectly well to open source projects. Make sure that for every decision, there's an owner that comes out of it. And especially value documentation. People who do it well are force multipliers for the entire project, the entire company, whatever you're doing. Right? Really reward that work. Incentivize it in your hiring process, hire specifically for it. There are ways to test for that. And make sure you've got the right social supports in place in your organization for managers to focus on the needs of employees, which are all going to be different depending on their at-home life. If we are continuing to stay in the sort of remote work environment for a long time, we're going to need to start thinking about how do we organize teams to stay cohesive without ever seeing each other, or getting coffee or a drink or whatever, and set up intentional social time as teams. We're probably all doing this. I mean, this event is kind of that, to get together and not do business things. I've seen a lot of places struggle going from, our company culture is, well, it is what it is. We're all in the office together, to suddenly realizing that the culture is defined by their chat, because that's where everybody's hanging out now. And so, if you have tools, try to share those inside your companies and your teams for what to do, how to build a better chat culture. And there's a natural resistance everywhere to large open chat channels, just like the town square. People avoid being vulnerable in those spaces. It's up to whoever is the leader of a project to set the good example and encourage people to do the vulnerable things, have open discussions about architecture or things they don't know, and encourage natural chat styles. Like, a lot of us tend to be very professional at work. I'm certainly less professional on Twitter, but it takes a little bit of nudging in a lot of organizations to do that. Some folks really had some interesting feedback for me about chat ops, and like using chatbots to support distributed teams in ways I'd never thought of. So I think 3 different people had responded with, they have a chatbot that DMs questions to the whole, messages questions to everybody on the team in private channels. And that sort of takes the form of their stand-up or their team report. So it saves everybody time, it's a little bit more fun. And then the bot aggregates all the responses and archives them. Then you can sort of see a graph over time of what folks have done without having to take up half an hour every day. I thought that was really neat. I've never done that, but it sounds pretty cool. And I know this is a really contentious topic. Like, I'm not going to say Vim is better than Emacs, but I do still feel like IRC is the best chat system out there, just because it's so customizable. I know we all love Slack, that it's got its issues, and every company has their own thing. And there's kind of a new chat on the block called Matrix, and it's also got its issues. But there's so many things to think about if you're selecting a new one, or what you're adding to the tools to help folks maintain culture over chat. Almost done. Like I said, some of the folks that had responded to me have also given talks on this stuff, or a podcast on it. I think Vicky's written a book that includes some of this stuff. So if you want to learn more about distributed teams, distributed culture, and how to apply some of that to your workplace, grab this. The slides will be up later. And thanks a bunch.